Hey there, Patreon family. Welcome back to part 2, where we are going to get a little experimental. We're going to try some different things, and I think we're going to make a great painting even greater. So with that said, I'm going to jump back into this yet again with my smallest flat-headed brush. I'm going to head to my palette, and I'm going to mix a medium to dark gray with a hint of blue. And this is going to be a similar base to what we did with all of the waterfalls. So here you can see it's a bit of a darker gray. I'll take some white, I'll make a slightly lighter version, and I'll just blend the two together until I get the value that I actually want. Then I'm going to head down right in here, find a spot, and start applying some of this. Now I'm going to want to start pretty far down initially and make it as small as I can, because that's going to give me the most opportunity to have it grow, but in the way that I want. If you start with a large amount, then you don't have a lot you can do with it. But here I'm kind of going back and forth, and the idea is that I have this mist, and maybe we'll turn it into water, we'll see, but I'm going to work it in between all of these protruding rocks. So I'm thinking about, okay, this one comes down and then it jets that way. This one comes down, it jets that way. Then, you know, maybe this comes up and it's swirling in that same effect, and it's dissipating as it gets higher. But I'm just continuously going back and forth and saying, okay, how would this naturally move through this area? And I'm just creating that base, recognizing that it's going to get farther and farther back. We can fill in this area, and I'm just filling it in at the bottom initially here, trying to create a sharp line against all of the rock, and then we can make it softer as we move up. With that said, I think I'll move the camera a little bit closer for this. That way, yet again, you can see the technique to a better degree. So here we are, we're a little bit closer. I don't have any additional paint on my brush. I'm just going to be moving around what we already have here. And I'm trying to keep it the most opaque down here at the bottom. And when I move up, it gets softer and softer. Here we can do a bit more. So there, it's very opaque. Now we'll move up, a little bit of a circular stroke. Let it dissipate, let it get softer, and then you want it to be very bright down here at the bottom, and then it'll get darker, and then it'll get brighter again. So you kind of have two gradients happening right in this area, and I'm slowly just kind of expanding it. There we go. This will be nice because it'll tie this darker bottom area up with all of that lighter area. Now we'll grab quite a bit of our lighter mixture. This is something I used in the regular waterfall, and this is our true highlight. I might just use the corner of the brush to begin, because I want it to be very minimal. I'm applying it initially kind of in the heart of the strokes we just made, more so in the middle area, and then as we get up here at the top, anywhere where light will be hitting it, because that's where it's going to be brighter. I'll just apply a little bit back here. I'm skipping some areas to give us a little bit of inconsistency, but also because I have a decent amount of paint right here on my brush, and I don't want it to be too much. I don't want it to become overwhelming. This is really where you want to be extra careful. We've done a great job with the painting thus far, and we don't want to kind of hurt it by just working a little bit too quickly this close to the finish line. So I'm being very careful with all of my applications and strokes here. There we go. Now I'm going to wipe that extra pigment off on my palette. Doesn't really matter where. Going to come back, and now I'm going to soften all of those highlights, blend them back into the darker application that we have, and I'm just doing a lot of this blend upwards. We have a lot of really hard textures in this area with the rocks, And I don't want that right now. I want some soft textures to work with it. Now, something I should note, this is all entirely dry. Nothing here is wet, and that's why it's blending as well as it is, or rather in the way that it is. If it was still wet, we'd be getting really, really creamy, smooth blends, but they'd be much more diluted and dark. We're getting the highlights that we are because it's as dry as it is. So if you want this type of effect, you should probably let it dry entirely. You could still render a really nice effect if you don't, but if you want to follow this exactly, that's what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. There we go. I have to tell you, this is one of those paintings where you just work on it and you smile, and you smile, and you smile, because it's going so, so well. I said it at the end of the last video, but I really do feel like, from a technical perspective, this is the best painting we've done here on the channel. And we're just going to make it even better. There we go. Can have that kind of moving out occasionally. Get a bit more highlight. Build this up yet again. Slowly though. And then I'll come back and soften this. Maybe create some extra little lines here. Good. As per usual in this Patreon episode, I'm going to try to cut significantly less. So we might get a bit more calm, quiet times, and we might get more time on refining, but you've seen the majority of the basic steps. Here we'll really focus on the details. Notice I'm always just starting from the bottom with these, and then I work my way up. It's consistent, and you have a lot of opportunity here to get quite good at it. Grab a bit more. And I'm going to start making some strokes that are fairly horizontal, that connect with each other occasionally, and that on the tips they kind of move upwards. That way it looks like it's moving back and forth and through this area. This is going to be with slightly more of a highlight than what we've used before. There we go. It's actually starting to look a lot like water. When you incorporate these sharper edges, it will get that effect. And I think that can actually be a really nice look. So, I don't know, maybe it can be mist, maybe it can be water. Depending upon your application, it will change, and that's not a bad thing. If you want it to be water, you can also make it a little bit brighter, like that. You can also do little taps if you want it to be water. Just kind of hitting that rock, splashing, and breaking up like this. There we go. I think at this point, I've pretty much decided that mine's going to be water. I just love the movement. I don't know if you're familiar with the oil painter William Turner, but from a compositional standpoint, from a movement in pieces standpoint, definitely my favorite painter. And he does a lot of work like this, where whether it be clouds or mist or water, there's always this kind of more extreme movement happening. And it feels so powerful. I love that. And even when I try to do very calm pieces, it tends to find its way into my work, I find. I always thought as an artist I would I would do better, at least commercially, if I didn't have that natural sensibility, just because I think a lot of people who like art and painting really like very calm things, and it's not that. It's very energetic from, again, a compositional standpoint, but I don't know, I think you make the best work when you make work you love, when you do things you are passionate about, because that's really what you're going to put the most thought, effort, and care into. And over the years, I think I've kind of embraced the fact that I do like these high energy areas in painting, and I always end up liking them so much more for it. So just something to consider. You will find an audience, you will find people that like what you like. Just make sure you're being true to that. You don't need to do what everybody else is doing. You don't need to kind of cater to an audience. Find people, friends, that just like what you like, as we've done here. It's a great community. I feel like there are a lot of people who like very different art, but there are also things that we can come together on and support each other with, and that's really wonderful. I see a lot of that over on the Stay Creative Facebook page. Everybody sharing different types of work and giving each other ideas and help, but also doing their own thing. It's pretty fantastic. There we go. So what was once mist is now quite a bit of water working its way through there. I'm going to take the extra paint off my palette, come back, soften some of this, and I do think I will move it up as if there's a bit of a mist in the water. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both. And I think both is really where you're going to find the most interesting piece. I'm also trying to make this a bit more gray, a bit more blended, so that when we get here, it stands out significantly more. And I'm going back over this a good number of times with different opacities and thicknesses of paint. And you can see that the more I do these taps, the more realistic it looks. I'm also doing more of them here in the foreground, because that's where you're going to see that real detail. In the background you can't see it because it's just too far away. The eye can't recognize it, so it doesn't make sense to put it in the background in here. But right up here, right up close, that's where it matters. There we go. Remember to leave separations in between your water or mist. See all those darker little areas in between these splashes? That's what's going to give us contrast and make this pop and look natural. There we go. Now I think we're done with this area right here, at least for now. So I think we'll move up to the sky and start working on some clouds. Now we did leave quite a bit of this area orange right here, and I did that intentionally to remind myself that I wanted clouds. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a darker gray, just like we did at the bottom. I'm going to work along the edge of this rock. And I said a darker gray, but as you can see, it's a light compared to what we have here. Remember that it's all relative. It's just not the brightest pigment we could have mixed. And then from there, I kind of do a little bit of a blend out I'm making it relatively soft. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to take away all of the detail that we have kind of in this rock area, but much like the trees before, it won't look natural unless you're willing to take out some detail and cover up some of that work you did. I know it can be hard, but you're really going to get the best results when you are willing to let go of a little bit of that background. Here I'm going in with a slight highlight. Just working this in. We'll come back up, grab a little bit of that darker gray yet again. Cover this orange. And we have a couple of options here with this one. We can move it behind or in front of this rock. We can also do both. I think I'll opt for both. I think at the bottom here, we'll have it behind, and then at the top, we'll move it in front. And that way, we have this small area, but we have a lot of depth in that small area. And we'll get a hint of blue. Wiping off the extra blue because it's just so strong. There, still a bit strong, but we're in the sky right now, so having a bit of extra blue in our pigment actually makes a bit of sense. Okay, so I'm starting by creating these clouds. The ones in the background are just about complete, but I'm going back and I'm softening the edges with a very soft touch. Then up here, I'm creating breaks in it. And now we'll go over part of our mountain here. There we go. And I think I'll create more on this side. So now we have clouds that go behind this mountain, in front of it, both of which are behind this one, and now we have a third set that are in front of this one right here. And it's that diversity that's going to make this really, really interesting. Different things to consider when working on your landscapes. How many layers of depth can you create, and how do you do that? There we go. It's a good start. Add some titanium white, make it a bit brighter. And when we go back in to add these highlights to the middle areas, we are inevitably going to make it a bit more thick and opaque. So be selective with where you do this, and recognize that you still want some of your clouds to be more opaque and less opaque than others. There we go. Softening a lot of these edges right here, doing a real blend out. Making sure we get the edges nicely. And notice how soft it all looks to begin with. It doesn't need to be dramatic. Initially, at least. You can build up to it, but start soft. Now we're adding some extra highlight. Let's get a little closer. Now, because we're as close as we are, we probably won't be able to show the palette in these shots, but I feel like we've done this mix about 100 times now. So you should be okay. I'll still talk about when we're doing a lighter and a darker version. But I'm also trying to get the sides of the canvas here, just a little bit. like that, because I do like to leave the sides of my canvas white generally. I really like painting. I like being reminded that what I'm looking at is a painting, and seeing the edge of a white canvas always does that for me. So it's an aesthetic I really like, though I know that isn't for everyone, so consider that. Consider your edges. What makes your piece your piece? Why do you like that? I know that a lot of people like black edges, just plain painted black edges, because it makes the piece itself pop, which I can wholly respect. And if you ever want to purchase any of my originals, I can and will work the edges the way you'd like. But with that said, I go to the edge like that, in that way, just because if it is going to remain white, I want it to look relatively clean. That said, I do like seeing the underlayers of paint. I always think that's really neat. Gives you an idea of the process of the painting and all that went into it. So here I'm just continuing to build out. Remember, I'm not using a pure white. It's a combination of the blue, the Mars black, and the titanium white. If it was just a pure titanium white, it would look far too stark, far too quickly. We don't want that. I think I'll make the cloud in front here a bit bigger, a bit more round, just because what we were doing technique-wise, we were doing these smaller strokes farther away, and it makes sense farther away because you don't see all of the detail, you don't see all of the little movements, you just see the major shape. But here in the foreground, or here a little bit closer to us, you'd see significantly more of the little intricacies and movements. So I'm just going back and I'm making this significantly more notable, I suppose. So I'm using those rounded strokes and creating these slightly bigger applications. And I think that's working really well. Good. And I'm going to wrap my clouds in a little bit of an arc, so it leads the eye from this corner into the painting rather than out of the painting. Just slowly building those highlights. And remember, in the distance, everything doesn't need to be hyper detailed or textured. So I'm going back to the edges and I'm doing a lot of really soft tapping to soften everything. I'm going to leave this area a bit more transparent, but I'll make this edge a bit more opaque and light. That way we have diversity of pigment and application. You know, I was just looking at this area and I was trying to figure out if I just did it or not. And I like that because it means that it fits into the piece as well as we wanted it to. Just going back, softening, taking out any highlights that are a little bit too bright, and just making it a bit more subtle. Here we have a little break-off cloud. Really like those. I'm going to angle these clouds a bit more just so they follow the arcs that we see throughout the piece. Just a bit more movement. That's so much better. Good. And this is quite subtle. If you throw a little bit more blue in there, it'll look like it's farther away, Has a bit more of that blue light working through it. You can do the same to the bottom here. But I think we'll take a little bit of a break from our clouds because I want to throw a little bit of snow on our mountains next. So now we're back to working more so in the body here, and yet again I'm going to take a lot of titanium white, a little bit here of our blue, not too much, but we're doing snow, so we want it to be nice and cool. And I think I'll start with this and just see how it goes. Now initially what we're going to do, we're going to look for kind of connective pieces, areas that have a bit of light, areas that might be a little bit flat, and we'll just tap this on and then we'll blend it back and maybe down a little bit. And I'm going to start very minimally. I'm not going to be doing too much in one area. I'm going to say, okay, you know, we have a lot there, I'll skip a little area, then I'll move up, maybe I'll connect that. Add a bit more here, connect that. And the whole idea behind this is just a little bit of extra light and detail in these areas. A lot of the painting, it has either fog or mist, and it's very bright. It's very eye-catching, and I want to balance it a little bit more. And in doing this, we get that opportunity. We're also giving it another texture, another color. Here I'm throwing it kind of on the tops of things. There we go. Had we done this initially, it probably would have looked a little bit awkward, just because it would have been the only hyper bright area in the painting, and it would have been up to the top right area here. So it wouldn't have made sense, or at least it visually wouldn't have been the smartest choice we could have made. But now it fits a lot better. Here I can have a lot of snow kind of coming down that ridge. Definitely apply some to the top here. It's a very dramatic pigment that we're making quite sharp, and because of that we're introducing a lot of extra form in the painting that we didn't have before. So we have an opportunity to create extra ledges as well, should we want to. You can also work this on top of / into your clouds and mist. You would still see this through the thin layers of cloud and mist, so it's okay to apply it in that same area. You might just want to go back and do a little bit of that mist movement through it, just to soften it a little bit. But again, it's one of those things where, yes, you are sacrificing detail, but you're doing it for the greater good of the painting. There we go. Now we'll take just a little bit of that snow and we'll just work it down here. Just a couple little taps. Makes sense that it would work its way down just a little bit. There we go. Nice and cohesive. We'll also run this up the mountain a little bit, and then back down a little bit. This is a bit closer to us, so I have it slightly brighter than the snow and the clouds in the background because it will pop a bit more. Remember, the closer it is, the less atmospheric light it will have. There we go. Everything's really starting to come together here. And then as we move farther in, of course, it should get more shadowy, a little bit darker, so I'm going to take all of that extra paint I have on my brush off. And then I'll go in with a significantly more thin application. Continue to build that snow in those layers, but to a less extreme degree. There we go. As a Canadian, I am no stranger to great amounts of snow. That said, I get a lot of requests for painting and doing lessons on deserts and things of that nature, but I've never been to the desert, so I'm not really sure how visually it actually looks. And if I were to paint it, I'd kind of be using reference photos and coming up with it off the top of my head. So I don't know how effective I would be at that type of subject, but this is something I do feel very confident in. There we go. I'm going to add a little bit over here. Again, these clips are quite a bit longer, but hopefully you find them useful. This one's looking a little too geometric for me, so I'm just going to start filling it in and working a bit of that snow down. That way we have less of a definitive shape. There we are. Nice little extra peak right there. Now we've been very focused on this area, and it's easy again to do an area really, really well and then forget about how it fits into the rest of the painting. We know it makes sense that it'll fit into the rest of the painting, but we should take a couple of steps back and evaluate from a little bit of a distance. So here we can see it from a distance, and you can really tell that this area, while bright, is still not as bright as what we have down here or here. So it progressed really, really well. You can also tell that this is slightly brighter than that. So everything is still well balanced. I feel very good about that. What we now need is a little bit of snow over on this rock as well. That way we don't have all of our lights kind of hanging out on the right-hand side of the canvas. So we're going to jump right up close in there next. So here we are. I'm going to take a lot of that highlight, but I'm also going to grab just a hint of Mars Black to work that back into here, because this, I do want it to be a little bit more subtle, So I'll start with some of the protruding pieces, like this one. That has a top, this has a top, and I'm kind of just throwing it on the top, kind of like if you are painting a holiday scene and snow is covering a house. You kind of just start on the top and then maybe you work your way down. I'm doing the same thing right here. So it's a good start. Mix some more paint. We'll cover this ledge right here. This one right here. Remember, we do want it to be relatively subtle. We have all of the highlights really stopping as they get up into this area, and the highlights from the snow will react in a similar way. Snow is more reflective, so it will be a little bit brighter, but not to a great extent. Head back to our snow, grab some more white. Moving up to the top area. Letting this be slightly more stark because it would build up to a greater degree up here. More of a large flat plane. There we go. Scenes like this are always really interesting because you have moving water, but you also have snow. So it tells you that the temperature, it's this really cool, fresh, comfortable level. There we go. I think we'll take a bit more of a highlighted snow, and maybe we'll work that into here just a little bit. That right there, it might be too bright, so we will take more Mars Black, work that down into here, make more of a gray, grab a little bit of blue from the side. There we are. I'll blend that in, that way it's less stark. And we'll just place it on a couple of these open areas. It'll look really nice and natural with all of the rock. It'll kind of blend in. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that extra snow color and just tap it on some of the tops of the trees that are really, really high up. I'm just using the corner of my brush, and I'm not doing much at all. I want this to be incredibly subtle. I'm not doing it to all of the trees. It'll just be some of these taller ones. I'm predominantly keeping these applications on the right-hand side as well, because that's where the light's hitting, and that's where the snow will reflect. Already makes it look so much more cohesive. Again, not all of them. There we go. I'm also throwing a little bit back into these rocks. That way it looks like snow a little bit. There we are. Now I'm just painting rocks. That pigment can work for both quite well. This is only when I'm really running out of paint though. See that? Just adding a little bit more detail, a little bit more highlight, bringing it all together. It's amazing how this far in the painting you can still find so many little areas just to touch up and bring together, isn't it? I think we'll also add a little bit up on top here and have that just work its way down to maybe that point where it stops. I don't have much paint on my brush right now, so I'm getting a very soft, subtle application, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so we did a lot with the painting right there. I think I'm going to take 3 or 4 minutes, take a step back, really evaluate what we've done and what I want to do next with it. So I took about a 6-minute break and I thought about what do we do next? What are the rules of the painting? The number one rule is that light is moving this way, meaning that all of the right-hand sides of our subjects are going to be brighter. But what does it mean in terms of shadows? Because we have this casting a shadow in kind of this undefined area. This is in front, so we don't see the shadow from this. The shadow here is a bit more this way, and you can see that it's darker here, but all of this, it just collects so much light that it is going to be brighter. And then this area right here, it's a little bit ambiguous. We didn't do too much with it in terms of direct or hard lighting. But all of the light, it's going to be moving through there. It's going to be collecting on the edges of this. And so I want to make the greens pop more. So I'm going to begin by taking a lot of our very, very bright yellow that we have right here. I'm going to take some titanium white. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow ochre. But I'm going to stick to the brighter pigments for most of this. I'll also grab a hint of our blue because that's what's going to actually turn it into a green. And very quickly, here you can see we have a saturated bright green. I'm going to take a little bit more yellow, and I'm going to take a little bit more white, which is going to desaturate it, but it's going to brighten it. So we'll just look for that balance. I think that's what I want. I like it enough to test it. So let's do just that. I'm going to come to the edge of this, because again, that's the way the light is working. And I'll just start applying it on that edge, and then I'll start working it back into the grass, working on top of dry layers, so it's not being diluted or blending with the previous applications. It kind of has a lot of opportunity to just be nice and bright. There we go. Of course, we'll need a bit of highlight on our trees now. They have some snow on them, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky to move around, but we'll just be a bit more careful. There we are. The edge of this tree is going to be getting a bit of extra light, so I'll just build that up. The edge of this one, lots of tapping. This one, build that in. The edge of this tree. And you can see how bright that is in comparison to what we have down here. So now we'll take more of it. I'll come to this grass, which is going to be receiving a lot of light, and look at the contrast there. I think we'll get a little bit closer for this area, that way you can just see all of the detail work. So here we are, yet again, we are a bit closer, and you can really tell just how bright this area is. I'm going to try to leave little openings in my strokes, that way you still see hints of that darker pigment, and that way this area doesn't become flat looking. And I'm starting there, I'm working my way back, it's slowly dissipating, it's getting a little bit less bright, which again I think makes sense considering where the light's coming from. But this is going to add a lot of depth to the painting. I have quite a bit of pigment on my brush right now, so I'm able to go the distance with it, which is nice. There we go. Work our way around all of these little rocks we have. And just build it up. I'll also go back to some of these trees, rotate my brush, just get some different applications, different highlights in here. And I'll also throw a little bit of that highlight on this one. This area too will receive quite a bit of light. So back to my palette. Right hand side. We're still going to have those nice dark shadows. There'll be some good contrast. But now we also have this nice bright light. The top of this might get a little bit, but not much. So I'm being quite careful in that area. This will also probably be getting a little bit. Well, it'll technically be getting more light, but it's farther away, so it'll be a bit more desaturated and it'll blend more with the natural colors. So I'm applying these highlights over here, but only once a lot of it's kind of come off my brush. This area is just kind of getting the excess. And I'm just blending it down. Might be able to grab just a hint, put it there, there, there. Taking the excess off on my palette, and then I'll do a little bit of a blend. There we go. You can really see how that just started to pop. Now the light's coming down here, so this will probably get a little bit of it, not too much. We'll just work it on some of these sides, but we'll quickly have it dissipate and we'll leave the majority of this the way it is. Again, this will have a bit of a shadow here, so we don't want much right there. In fact, I think I made it a little too bright, so I'll grab some Mars Black, a little bit of our yellow, a bit more titanium white, and I'm just trying to remix a darker green that we had back here. There we go. You can also take a hint of this darker green and work it back over here if you just want some extra diversity in your colors. And we added a lot of highlight to this, but we didn't add highlight to was our rocks or our path. So we'll start with our path. We'll just grab some of our brown. Put that right there. Definitely a highlight. But not enough of one. Interesting. We'll just start here. Palette's getting a little messy. There we go. That looks like it makes more sense. And I'll just have it slowly dissipate as we move into the background here. See that paint's running out, still doing it in taps so that I get a little bit of texture and change, and then it'll get nice and dark right along there. When we get back out front, it can be brighter again. Might be a little bit too bright though, so we'll grab more brown. There we go. Okay, so now I have a very paint covered brush. It has a lot of brown on it. I don't necessarily want that, so I'll just take a little paper towel, take the majority of that off, head back to our palette, take some titanium white, move down here, take a hint of our blue, hint of our black, very small hints. Realize that you can't really see what I'm doing, so I'm just taking a very bright gray, and I'm applying it on some of our rocks. Because we made the grass much lighter, but we didn't make that much lighter. So taking that pigment off my brush, make it a little bit darker now. Mars black. I'm just trying to find that sweet spot. Trying to find a lot of the highlights that we've already used, a lot of those spots, and then I'm just building on them slightly. Recognize that the farther back we get here, the darker it'll get. So I didn't go here first, and I'm just letting my paint run out over here. It's going to give us a slight bump of contrast though. Going over these areas again just to soften them a little bit. Remember, the more you go over an area, the more you will soften it. This will also be an opportunity to build out extra little areas. You can also take those highlights down here. So we added a lot of extra greens here, here, and down in the grass, but what we didn't do is add extra greens to this, and they would definitely be getting quite a bit if the light's moving that way. So I'm going to take, yet again, a lot of our yellow here, a little bit of our yellow ochre, a little bit of our titanium white, and then even less of our blue, because again, blue is a significantly stronger pigment than yellow. Now this is a very fresh green that we have here. I want it to be a bit more warm, so I'm going to throw a little bit more of this in there. I'm going to throw a little bit more of this. And it tends to get as cool as it does because we're using a very cool blue. If you wanted more of a warm blue, you could use a French ultramarine. But we're quite far in the painting, and for consistency's sake, I'm going to continue using the cool blue to mix with. With that said, I'm now coming back up in here. I'm creating extra little taps, building out our branches more with this highlight. Predominantly sticking to the right-hand side. Working on top of the branches I've already established, and with the details I've already established, but just kind of building them up, doing more with them. as I start to run out of paint, I'm moving to the left-hand side, giving that a little bit of a highlight, but not as much. Head back to the palette, grab some more. We can also dance around to this tree. It's a good start for sure. Will take a number of applications though. Okay, so heading back, I'm going to mix up an even brighter mixture now. So more yellow, more white. Again, more yellow, more white. And that looks like it should do. It's a little bit brighter, so I'm applying it on tops. There we go. You can see that the tree is looking a lot more thick now, much more full. These branches feel much more alive. And this is something that will probably take me another hour, hour and a half. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do this part. But all we're doing is just going back and adding more highlights on top of what we've already established. Doing multiple layers of them. Predominantly on the right-hand side. So the larger tree right here is now finished. That probably took me about 4 hours, which was significantly longer than I intended, but that is the reason why we don't film absolutely everything. With that said, I do want to now move over into this cluster of trees right here. So what I was doing before, I kind of had the light coming through this way, illuminating the right-hand side of these trees, but I've kind of changed the lighting scheme in this so that it's coming from up here. It's, giving all of these highlights to this area, and a little bit of that light spreading out. So I think what I really want to do is change the lighting setup of these and move the highlights over to the left-hand side. So this actually isn't going to be all that difficult. We're just going to take a little bit of our yellow, going to take a little bit of our white, hint of our blue, make a nice little highlight right there. Going to tap on the left-hand side using the corner of my brush. Lots of little details and implications. I'll move into the tree occasionally, but for the most part we're staying to that left-hand side. Just like that. Tree right here. It's a bit farther away, so we won't get as much separation in the highlights. It'll be a bit more of a vertical stroke, but I'll still do those taps to keep it interesting. Here's a tree in the background. I already did it with this one just to kind of test it, see if I liked it. So I'm just throwing these on the other side. Then I'm going to head back to my palette, grab a little bit of that blue, mix it right there. Grab a little bit of our black. Take this, move it down closer to our greens. Mix up a nice green. Grab some more Mars Black. There we go. And I'll just try to cover some of the highlights on the right-hand side. Doesn't need to be all of them. That light can wrap around just a little bit. But for the most part, we're trying to make it a bit darker. There we go. Very quick fix. Might also take a little bit of highlight and just work it back into this one. It's a bit closer to us, so it can have more detail than that and that. And you can see how they progressively get a little bit lighter and have a little bit more detail. as they move into the foreground. Good. Really good. So now we're heading back up into the sky. I did wipe off my brush so that it doesn't really have much green on it left. And we don't want much green because we're going to be working on clouds. We're going to have a lot of blues, a lot of grays, and if we had green on our brush, the blue and the green, they really wouldn't turn into what we wanted up here. So make sure your brush is relatively clean or switch to a new one. With that, I'm going to grab some of this blue. We'll mix in a new area up here. I'll grab a lot of titanium white. I'll grab a little bit of Mars black. And we'll start by creating this kind of mid to dark gray. We'll say, is this the color we want for our sky? I think it's a little bit too dark, and what I actually really like is what we have right between these two mountains right here. So I think I'll try to mix that again. So I'll use that as my base. On my brush, I'll just do a new mixture right here. As you can see, it's still quite far from white, and I'll give it a little test. I can tell that it's significantly more bright than what I want. So we'll get a little bit of blue, wipe off the excess, and I'll blend my darker and my lighter pigments together and see if this matches what we want more. Now it's significantly too dark. So lots of trial and error. Add more titanium white, test it again, and there we have it. So I'm going to head over here, and I think I'll start this one kind of in the distance, like this. I want it to be lighter than the mountains, at least the shadow side of them. And I'm going to start breaking it up into a couple little pieces. I'm going to soften the edges a little bit. The more we soften it, the more transparent it'll be. There we go. Good start. I think I'll add a little bit of light to it. Test that where we were. Just going over my previous applications with this little adjustment. Very good. I think we'll do maybe a little bit over here. You can see just how subtle that one is, and I really like the subtle look for these, at least when we're beginning. We can make them more dramatic in a little bit. Then I think I'll take more of a highlight, yet again, just building it. Kind of thinking about how I want this. I think I'll create some duality, meaning create a similar cloud to what we have over there, over on the left-hand side. That way they kind of match each other. As you can see, it's still a gray white. It isn't a pure white. And that's quite useful. I'm leaving little openings. These don't need to be thick, dense clouds. It's a fairly bright day. And I don't want the arch to be too dramatic. You can see that there's a lot of movement happening there. So I'm going to start straightening it out just a little bit. I want the implication of the arch and the matching, but I don't want it to look too forced. I want it to be a bit more natural. So here I'm going back, I'm softening edges, doing a bit of that rounded stroke. There we go. We'll brighten it. Adding that highlight initially in the middle. Now we're building some depth. I have a lot of paint on my brush right now, so I'm kind of just distributing it in all of the different areas that I can. And then once I feel like I have a minimal amount left on my brush, I can go back and blend. Move from one side of the canvas to the other. I'm kind of applying the highlight to the bottom more so than the top, because hypothetically the light's coming this way probably isn't that high in the sky right now. So that highlight will probably graze the bottom. Leaving the gray more so on the top. Occasionally you can see that I'm combining them, working those highlights up a little bit, letting it get lost in the sky again. When you do that, you can kind of build bigger clouds slowly and organically. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're starting small with just a couple, and we're letting them naturally evolve. You can take a little bit of this highlight, go back, thicken it. I'm going to do a couple little horizontal clouds in the distance here with that really bright pigment, making them very transparent. It'll make them look farther away. I'm also making them look quite soft. Again, balancing it, but I'm putting them farther down this time. And it'll always create a little bit of depth when you put them right beside a rock, because it makes them visibly behind something. Here I'm expanding this one. I didn't really plan how I wanted these clouds to be before I did this, so a lot of it's kind of assessment in the moment. Saying, okay, does that look too full? Does it look too flat? Does it balance with everything else? And I kind of just go back and forth until I have what I want. Do I want it to be more thick? More thin? If I want it to be more thin, I just spread it out more. If I want it to be more thick, I grab more pigment. And I'm almost exclusively working with that brighter pigment right now. Well, that's good. I have a little bit of extra pigment on my brush right now, so I think I'll apply some highlights to the bottom of this one in the background. Looks like it fits in a little bit better now. It's nice. I think we'll kind of create a larger cloud here on the left-hand side and have it kind of drape over to the right-hand side. So again, the majority of it is arching, but it's also quite horizontal. It's a very subtle arch. It's large for the most part, but there are these little breaks. I'll move these horizontal clouds to be a bit more arched to kind of fit in with the rest of this. We're at the finish line of the painting now. We don't want to rush anything. I'm still just working with the highlight, which is why I'm not showing the palette right now. And then eventually we need to work it over here, being very soft initially, not using much pigment at all. Just kind of figuring out where I want clouds to be. And now you can see that they're starting to connect. It's this middle area that's really going to matter because the top of the arch isn't seen on the canvas. So I need to be really aware of what we do in this middle area. That's what's going to really solidify the fact that it is one large kind of cloud or system of clouds. Starting very transparent and then building. Oh, that's nice. I like that. It's a very classical looking cloud, just the way the strokes are done, which I like. Around the 1800s, this was a fairly common way of painting them. Just visually, a lot of stretching, a lot of arching. It's a very American way of painting clouds, and I really, really love it myself. If you're looking for great landscape artists of the past, I highly recommend looking up Thomas Cole and Thomas Moran. You'll see a lot of this sort of thing. Made absolutely giant, gorgeous landscapes. There we go. As I get farther away, I want them to be a little bit more subtle. So I'm using less pressure and less pigment. But I might make this into a singular cloud here. There we go. Have a little bit of gray on my brush. So I'm just covering the blue in the area that would take up.